You hear a lot of people say things like the sky's the limit and shoot for the stars and shoot for the sky. And that's usually a metaphor for being very optimistic about things, being very ambitious about things, and looking at how high can we get with something. And that's all great, but in reality, there's a lot of people on the planet that believe that the sky is not actually limited, that there's much more that we can do, and in fact, we should be looking beyond the Earth's atmosphere and looking into outer space. So there's a lot of space exploration going on these days, a lot of space technology, and it's my pleasure today to welcome to the Mendable channel Starfury, who is joining me today from the Washington, D.C. area. And he has got a lot of background and a lot of interest in space, but we've got a lot of other things we can talk about. So Starfury, welcome. Great to see you here today.
Thank you, David. I'm glad for the invite. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah. So you are a founder of a number of organizations, one of which, probably the most prominent of which, is called Starfura, and I'll have you walk us through exactly what that is in a moment. But one first question I'd like to ask you is, I know you're a military veteran. I know you're a big advocate for support for military veterans. And did the space exploration and technology come out of your career in the military, or did it just kind of happen separately?
Well, thank you for that question. I'm glad. First of all, I want to say again, thank you for the invite for bringing me to your Mendable Stage, a podcast. And so, to answer your question, it actually the Army, the U.S. United States Army, was just the catalyst to drive me through my journey to where I'm at today. I just started off actually as a 7-year-old boy in the slums of Trinidad and Tobago, which is the island off of Venezuela. That's originally where I was born. That's where I'm from. And I've told this story numerous times, but I'll say it for your audience. I got my passion. I was the oldest of 8 kids, had multiple cousins, uncles, aunts, and well, my father was not, he's alive, but he wasn't in the picture. My mom and dad were not married. So my grandfather and grandma raised me. And of course, my mom as well. And as a kid growing up in the islands, I had separately from other kids was my grandfather worked for the Prime Minister, Dr. Eric Williams of Trinidad. My grandma was the director of the General Hospital. They both had passed away a long time ago. But when I was growing up with them, they had great status. So when I would come home, most kids would be like, playing everywhere. What I would do is I would sit on my grandfather's lap, his knee, and we would watch the first ever recorded episodes of Star Trek. So that, of all the things, and we're talking about, I was born in 73, so in the 70s, that's when television really took off with channels, and we had BBC, Benny Hill, we had great Doctor Who, was also inspired by Doctor Who as well. But Star Trek really captured me, and so from there, I started to build on this space, like what if, one of the biggest things I explain to people is one of the questions I asked my grandfather, I remember, was that ship actually in another planet, orbiting that planet? And he would always say, yeah, that's true. And I was like, wow, so that's where it came from.
Okay, great. So I'd love to ask you a lot more about the space exploration and Starfurians and all of the organizations, but I know that the military was a huge part of your life. Would you tell me a little bit about your military career, when you joined the military, what you did? I know you deployed in the Middle East during many conflict times. So would you just tell us a little bit about that story?
No, absolutely. My greatest hero when I was growing up, besides having an interest in Captain Kirk and Darth Vader and Star Wars, my other third hero was Rambo. I got fascinated by his story, and I watched his story, and I watched other movies like Platoon, but Rambo really did it for me. And so one day, as I was told my mom, say, I could be like him, and my mom laughed like, oh, so you could, take out these many men and cover yourself up with mud and all that. I said, yeah, I could do that. So I attempted once to join the military. I failed the test, and it took the third try. try. And at the third time, I passed the test and came in as a private. At the time, I wasn't a citizen. I was living with my mom and my stepdad in U.S. Virgin Islands. And so from there, I joined when I was 17. Graduated from high school and couldn't afford college, so that started off my career. I chose the career. I had multiple career paths I was qualified for, but I chose administration specialist, which is a code for 75 Bravo. And if any of your audience who are veterans know that we're called the pencil pushers. We're the admin clerks, and so we're the ones who would do understand the finance, the promotions, the awards, the policies and procedures. That's who we are. And so going through that process, I ended up at Fort Knox, the famous, if you probably heard of it, where the gold in the United States, the Army base. That's where I did my basic training. And after the first try, I failed. And after the second try of recycling, I finally passed boot camp. Then I was transferred to Fort Benjamin Harris in Indianapolis, where I did my AIT, which is the real admin section. I learned to type there. I never taught typing in my life until I got there. I never knew how to type. They taught me. And so I learned the policies. And my very first duty station was JRTC, first of the 509th, Op 4 at Little Rock Air Force Base, Arkansas in 1992. Why is that significant? Because that was the unit that trained other Army units. So if they were the 89th Airborne, 82nd Airborne, 101, and all these big units, we were the ones training them. And I got so much knowledge from them. So from that, and by the way, I flew in my first Russian helicopter. They in the training, yeah, it's called the HIP 8 and the H9, and so from there, I excel in the ranks. We got my clearance, and I started moving into other units. I went to explosive ordnance, the Patriot missile battery. I was in 243rd Patriots. I went to CID, criminal investigation, and I ended up, before I went to Iraq, my last duty station was right here in Maryland, in Laurel, Fort Meade, NSA, which I worked for military intelligence, 321st MI, military intelligence. So from there, I came out, became a correction officer, and because of 9/11, I went back in. I volunteered, and I went to Iraq. My last unit was Special Forces. So I went with Fifth Special Forces. I was adjunct to their unit, and so I wore the patch and went to Iraq and served in the war. Got into there, and as most people, I told my story. I died over there. I got sick really bad in the height of the war, and I literally, they found me on the side of the road. They didn't know what happened, if I was attacked or whatever, but I died. They resuscitated me. I served another 2 months. Then I got sick again, and they medevaced me back. So yeah. So in a nutshell, I had a really solid experience within the military, and I thank the Army. Good or bad, I thank them.
Now, I know that a lot of the work that you do is for the benefit of veterans and minorities. And I know that, as I said earlier on, you are a huge supporter and proponent of veteran services. And can I ask you, was the transition out of the military into civilian life a difficult thing for you? How did that work? Because I've heard so many different stories from people who've come out of the military who say that it can be a really hard transition to get back into civilian life again.
Well, yes. And some, like myself, I didn't have a civilian life. I went in right out of, right. I didn't even graduate high school yet when I signed up. It was called the delay entry program. So while in high school, I took the test, finally passed the test, the ASVAB test. And then I went in from there, went to boot camp. So I was just fresh off the boat. This wide-eyed kid didn't even have a driver's license, right? And so for me and many others like me, there was no integrated civilian life. I had no idea what civilian life was. And so when the first time I left the military with honorable discharge in 99, there was no internet, no cell phone. So by me, I was like, hey, I need a job. Oh yeah, you go to the library and look at an example on a little library computer of how to do a resume. So I was teaching myself how to do it, and I went to college. It didn't work the first time, but I went to Boo University here in Maryland. It wasn't a successful. I didn't know that transition of civilian life. At night I would go to school in the day, and at night I was washing cars at Baltimore Airport for money. And so that transitional, I didn't have it. It wasn't until the second time when I came out and was homeless at one time. Again, trying to get myself together, didn't have a job. I went in the second time and I volunteered. When I came out the second time, that's when civilian life, that part kicked in. So it was very difficult. It was I imagine going to an employer, again, no internet, and you're doing a resume, and there's a formula to that. There's a format, and I'm like, yeah, I was an armor sergeant. I had weapons and all of this, and someone's looking at you like, okay, but can you, do you know dot matrix? Do you know, you know? And so yes, it was difficult, but it was a blessing in disguise because it led me to where I am today with
Yeah.
Starfura.
And I know that you have several educational qualifications. So even though you were this fresh high school kid that joined the army, I know that you went on and got quite a bit of additional higher education. So great that you did that. So let's circle back to today. And would you tell me a little bit about Starfurians and any of the organizations that you started and what the mission is there?
So yeah, so it is interesting. You started on the military aspect. When I was in Iraq, I was a buck sergeant, and I was working in intelligence with special forces. And my very first mentor, Colonel Campbell, Tiberius Campbell, I will never forget him ever. He came to me one day. He said, "You are a smart guy. You're the only sergeant in amongst officers. You're talking about colonels and majors and captains, and you're sitting there having intellectual discussions with these guys. And you're working, you are, and you're talking to these guys about politics, finance, and diversity. And this is 2003. And so one day he said to me outside, he said, why are you here? You're way too smart to be here because you're so involved in that higher level that I don't see in other people. It's rare." And I said, "Well, I was homeless and I volunteered. I'm out here for money." And I said, that's why I'm here." And then the second question he asked, "Well, what it is you want to do?" I said, "Well, I really don't know. I really have a passion for law. I have a passion for film." I said, but that's where the Starfury came from. They called me Sergeant Starfury in Iraq. That was my call sign. So that's where my passion is, film and sci-fi. And so he said, "You know what? I'm going to mentor you." I was like, "Okay, I don't know what that is." I'm thinking it's, "Oh, I'm on punishment duty. I'm being punished." But he said, "No, no, 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 no. I'm going to show you what mentorship is. I'm going to show you." So after work around like 4 to 6, constantly for about 2 months, he brought me in this one burnt out room, and he said, "Okay, here's a pen and pad. Here's what we're going to do." And he went through the steps. Today we're going to talk about personal growth. Today we're going to talk about investing. Today we're going to talk about planning and what does that look like, your future. And I was like, okay, and I would take notes. And he said, write down 4 things. Well, at the time it was 3. I put 4 that you would like to do in the next year. If you get back from here, from the war, what is it you would like to do? And I said, "Well, I want to buy a truck. I want to buy a house." He said, "Okay, I would like you to write down, go back to college. You started, and I would like you to pursue it." So I said, "Okay." And he said, "Now take that paper, put it in your pocket, keep it with you, put it in anywhere secure, and wherever you go, you have it. Look at it from time to time." I said, "Okay." The last time I got medevac, I got sick real bad. I was medevac to Walter Reed. They did a makeup on me. They said, "Okay, you have this reaction. We don't know." And they're like, "Okay." And then I left. And while I was at Walter Reed, he was still in Iraq in Baghdad. He called me. He said, "Hey, you got a call." Went downstairs to the front desk. They said, "You got a call from Colonel Campbell." And he called me. He said, "Hey, you made it. I heard you're doing okay." I said, "Yes, sir." Are you going to stick to the plan that we laid out?" I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "God bless you. Good luck." And he hung up, and I never heard from him again. And then from there, I started at Prince George's Community College, Went to here in Maryland, got my associates, went to Howard University, famous black, they call it HSBCU, historically black college. Went to that, got my bachelor's in radio, television, and film, got my minor in theater. The dean, David Woods, Dr. Woods, was so impressed. He vouched for me to go further, and he made a couple phone calls and got me into Chapman University in California for my master's. He was so impressed that he, out of his own pocket, he gave me $2,000. He said,
Wow,
"Here's
that's amazing.
$2,000." Yeah, he was like, "Here you go. Go, young man. I'm so proud of you. You graduated cum laude. Go further." So I packed up my bags. I was married at the time. I was going through a divorce. I packed up my bags, put everything in my car, and I drove from Maryland to California. Took 4 days. And I stopped along the way, and then I made it the day before orientation. Went to Chapman University at the Dodge Film Program for sound engineering and directing. They were so impressed. I originally started for sound engineering, but they were so impressed with my directing skills. They put me in the directing program on the side. Met my wife now. We met there in California. Came out, got married, had my son, and then while I was writing my book, I wrote a book about a memoir of myself. Was looking for work, couldn't find work. The government said, "Hey, if you're not working, we could send you back to school." So my fourth degree was an associate's. Is an associate's in environmental science at Saddleback in California. So after that, I created my first company, Military Booch, which is beyond objectives, obstacles, and training science. It's pretty much a curriculum I built for those who want to go into the military. And I took all my failures and turned it into a curriculum. So to teach people how to have a successful career in the military. That was my first company. Successful, got a $2,000 contract in 2017 in Chicago. I had 19 kids there. I flew out there, assisted them, two, my very first class, got two into the program, two passed the Army test. Out of that, I had a training called Space and Future Warfare. So out of that training came Starfura, but it was first pitched as Starfury Space Academy. I was invited to St. Joseph University and everything, and people laughed. People was like, what are you talking about? There's NASA. NASA could do it. And I said, okay, When I went and prayed to God, and God said, are you? I want you to do this. I said, okay. I said, I don't know what to do. I went to the back of my house. I prayed. I said, I don't know what to do. No one's taking me serious. He said, nope, I want you to do this. And then he asked me, if you wanted to go into space, where would you go?
And how did you answer that question?
That's it right there. It was Starfura. And so Starfura is an acronym for Space Terraformation Astronautics Research for United Residents of Alpha. It was my third nonprofit, and that one people really took interest. When I switched and I answered that question, that's what came about. So we got my wife and I registered our EIN tax ID back in 2016. We moved from California here 4 years ago. My wife, I work for Social Security Administration government. My wife works for University of Maryland. And through that time, we got the license and all the documents and registered it here in DC. And soon after, we got a 501c3 certification, and then the rest is history. And then this second company, Starfurians, I launched it this year as the for-profit, which we took the training and put it into the for-profit arena. I know it's a long answer, but that's where it is.
And just for anybody that's not familiar with the US, a 501c3 is a non-profit charitable organization. It's structured that way for tax purposes, so I'll just mention that. And in fact, I think one of the things I think you may know about me is that I am actually an American citizen. I lived most of my adult life in the US. I lived in California, I lived in New York. And so as an American citizen, it's very appropriate for me to say thank you for your service to the US military.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Loved it.
I know you're interested in mental health. How did you get connected with Mendable? And what is your interest in mental health? How did that happen?
Well, as you know, I'm dear friends with Nicole Mills. Nicole, she's one of the regulars in the room as well. She's part of the big Mendable team. It was a year and a half ago, last summer in June, I met her. Her and her daughter. We were at Starfura and Starfurians. We were at a booth at a summer festival. Her daughter came up, and we were the only table that had a space arena there. And so they came up and we spoke, and they were so excited, and we became best friends after. She met my wife, and then one day, I believe it was this year, early this year, she said, "Hey, I need you to please come into Clubhouse and be a part of Mendable." And I said, "I have no idea." I said, "Okay." And then when I realized, as I became in the room, I realized what it was about. It was the mental health space and everything. So to answer your question, that's the introduction of getting into Mendable. It was through Miss Nicole Mills.
Otherwise known as the anxiety coach.
The anxiety coach, yes. Let me put a plug in. She's known as the anxiety coach. Phenomenal, phenomenal lady. If you ever meet her in person, if you ever hear her, I mean, she's too is phenomenal.
I actually have met Nicole in person. I met her when I was
Okay,
in
great.
DC earlier in the year. Yeah.
Yeah, you know I'm
Yeah.
saying is true. She is phenomenal. A lot of great energy. Why mental health? Um, there's one of the stigmas growing up in the islands. You at most places, not just the islands, most even in I believe in England too, in the UK, you really don't talk about mental health. Mental health was such a fringe taboo growing up. There was a lot of names, right? In the military, we call it a shell shock, right? Before the scientific name of PTSD, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes people mistake it for anger issues, right? Or you're different. So I've grown up in this environment where I was super. Most people consider me as a kind of savant, real super smart, because I read encyclopedias over the summer. You know, I did. My stepdad was an architect. He showed me architect. You know, I've been on construction sites. So and then of course I'm a sci-fi person. So I had a wide range of scopes of knowledge in my area. However, with that said, it also came with the burden of, you're not one of us, right? You're strange, you're different. And then it's even more compounding which I found out in the United States, which wasn't an issue growing up in Trinidad, is you're black, so you have this stigma against you, even though I'm not from here. But I fell into that stigma as well, right? So there were so many levels of mentality and that I was dealing with. And of course, growing up with well, not a broken home. Again, my mom and dad were not married. So there was some issues there as well. There's a lot of issues there. That in itself was a journey in a whole. So when I was in the military and I was dealing with my anger issues and I was dealing with people who were like, you're not smart enough, or you need to do this, or, I would ask for something and they were like, some smart comment, that added to those layers as well. To the point where now, back to the beginning, I'm in the civilian world. I'm dealing with that, those pressures as well. I'm dealing with, the stigma of who I am as just a regular black person. Dealing with the fact that I'm a veteran, which I have to always say, like, hey, I'm not a criminal. I'm a veteran. Oh, okay, and then so on and so on and so on. And so there were so many wide ranges of discovery of identifying who I was, who I am today, that I identified with the mental health aspect now, to the point where my original name, my birth name, is actually Shimon Leonard Phillip. That was my original name. Shimon is a Hebrew name because it came from Shimon Peres. And then one day I asked my dad, I said, how did he get the name Shimon? That's Hebrew. Well, when you were being born, I was in the waiting room and I saw a magazine, Shimon Peres. And I said, that's an awesome name, so I named you Shimon. Right? So So over time it changed. When I came back from Iraq, I became Shimon Starfury. I did a name change, and people were like, "Oh, Starfury is cool." But then people were mispronouncing my first name Shimon, and they were calling me Shimon, and that happened everywhere I go. And so one day, right when I created Military Boots, God spoke to me. It was really God. I got a voice like, "You need to. It's time for you to take that extra step. You need to change your name." So I was like, okay, what am I hearing? You need to become Star Fury. Just Star Fury. That's it. That's your final change. And so I came to my wife who were in California. I said, hey, I got a voice. I said, I need to change my name to Star Fury. My wife looked at me like, yeah, you're gonna do that by yourself. I'm not I'm not part of that. I'll support you, but that's on you.
Yeah.
So I went in. The story goes, I went into California. I went to the Riverside, California, which is outside of LA. It's in the desert. I went out to the court, filled out the application, and I said I want to change my name to Star Fury, just Star Fury. And the guy was like, okay. Went before the judge on a Friday in January 19th. I will never forget it. And it was by myself. I was the last person on the docket. There was no one else in the room. And he said, you want to do what? I said, I just want to be called Star Fury. And he said, why? And I showed him, well, I was in the military. I got a certificate, Shimon Starfield. I was baptized in Jordan. I was just giving and he just looked at me and looked at me and he said, okay. And then and then it was silence for 2 minutes. And I'm standing there. And then he said, well, good luck, son. You're approved. And I said, thank you, sir. And I walked out. He said, take it to the the clerk and pay your fee. The fee to do a name change is $445 in California. That's period. Doesn't matter if you're married or whatever. So here I am, scrambled money. I'm going to the desk and I'm like, okay, I'm about to take a hit. My bank will probably be negative. I only got like 300. I want to pay for my name change. The clerk said, oh, you're Star Fury. I said, yep. He said, wow, that's an awesome name. Cool. Said, I'm ready. He said, oh, no, no, no. There's no payment. And I'm like, what do you mean? What do you mean there's no payment? Oh, the judge waived your fee. He was impressed.
Wow.
Have a nice day. That was the point, David. Was like, yep, there's something here. I'm going to go with it. so,
Yeah.
and so again, so that's when I realized I was on this path of mental discovery because that was the test right there. I heard a voice, I did it, and I started to pursue that. And so now, looking back, and I'm gonna tell you the story that at the very end of our interview, something happened today. That's also was so. It happened this morning with my son, but it was so profound with his mental health. And I'll even say this: no qualms to my mom. My mom was island mom, raising a child, raising a son. Very, very, let's say, abrasive in her teachings. And then a couple of years ago, it was, well, my wife and I have been married 14 years, been knowing each other for 3 years. So you can almost say 20 years we knew each other. And then when she went with my wife, the second time, she told my wife, and I was standing in the room. I had no, now I'm about to say I had no idea. And she told my wife one day, because of a mom, it was so hard. And I was so young when I had him. I wanted to, I was on my way to abort him. I was about to have an abortion because I was afraid. We grew up in a Catholic family. My mom was terrified of my grandmother, and she was in secret. She was on her way to have an abortion of me. And she said while she was there, it was storming. She said it was raining. And while she was on her way there, she heard a voice, and she think it was from God that told her, if you abort him, meaning me, you too would die.
Hmm.
And she stopped and she turned around and she said she went home and told my grandmother, and they were very distraught and everything. But, they had me, of course, as a story, the rest was history. So again, all of that, when I heard that story, I took back and I said, yeah, yeah, I get it. I literally get it now, right? So that's why I'm into the mental health space. I now am an advocate for mental health, not only because of my issues, but for, to help everyone else and my family.
Before we wrap up, I'd like to just ask you two-part question. So, if there's one thing you'd like to see happen in space exploration, what would it be? And if there's one thing you'd like to see happen in the world of mental health, what would that be?
For the space exploration, my biggest goal that I would like to see, or if I could see it, is a complete autonomy of diversity in space. My fear, and I've only shared this with certain people in my circle, but my biggest fear is, and other people have said it, I've heard people said it. My biggest fear is we're going to repeat all our mistakes and all our ills on another planet, whether it's Mars, the moon, Europa. It doesn't matter where we go. We're going to take those ills, those strifes, those prejudices with us. And my goal, and that's why such a big advocate for space. I'm very committed, very deep with the people that support me. Is I'm fighting for that not to happen. What does that mean? It's like, oh, what do you mean? Well, we've had slavery, we've had class warfare, we've had all these things here on this planet, and because space is the final frontier, I cannot allow for us as humanity of people who we are to go somewhere and to take that mentality there and then just start over again. And I'm a strong advocate. To me, call me old fashioned. I'm a strong advocate of the Star Trek theory that we're all one. We're all collectively one. It doesn't matter who. It doesn't even matter if you're an alien. We have to strive to be better than who we are. Kirk he said that, and even Spock, they always say that. We have to strive for you. I'm Kirk. We have to strive for better who we are. We're better than this. He would go into this rant. I believe in that. I've always believed in that. So if anything, I would like to see, David, is that aspect. The second thing with mental health, I would like to see is that one is a loaded question. What I would like to see is more exposure on the topic through everyone. Meaning that I can even talk about myself. Right now, I'm going through a kind of like a litigation through the government because there was something that happened to me 2 years ago working for the government where I was discriminated against my disability. I'm a 100% disabled veteran. So I'm not only a veteran, I'm a 100% permanent total, which if you don't know, if you don't know, that means that I am the top of the tier when it comes to a veteran who is disabled. I don't look it, but I am. It took a mental toll on me through the job, fear of losing my job, fear of what I'm going to do next, all because someone had an interpretation of who they believe that how disabled I am, right? Now, I won't go into it, but that's what I mean by a broader aspect of it. Because people say, yo, I'm from mental health. They have mental health awareness. They have suicide awareness month, right? And there's a lot of organizations like Sophia. Sophia is the president of Mendable. I mean, what she's doing is so phenomenal. But again, we have to hold people accountable for that, right? So my goal, if I can answer that question, would be a broader, more access, a broader perspective, and hold true across the board for mental health. So again, it won't be mental health 80%, 20% is still taboo. No, there is an issue. We need to take care of it.
Starfury, thank you. It's been great talking to you. Thanks to those of you that are watching. In the narrative below, I am putting Starfury's social media, his website, and the information so you can go and find out about him and follow him if you like.
Oh, before you go, I did commit. I want to say something that happened real quick.
You did.
If you just give me a little, I know we're wrapping up.
Yeah.
My son, I came downstairs because I had a day off for other reasons, And I came downstairs and I found this sheet of paper. And it's real quick. I'm going to tell this story. And it was a project he had to do, and I had no idea he was doing it. And then, and this is all in the mental aspect. But my wife was like, "You need telling my son at breakfast. You need to show you that. You need to show you that." And I said, "Okay, what is this?" And then he drew it, and it was a project of pretty much who you are and all about you. And he asked who your hero was, and he wrote on here, "My dad." I don't know if you could see it. And I literally, I of course, I was like, "Okay, thank you." I hugged him and we said a prayer. I took him to school. And while I was going to school, taking him to school, I said, "Hey, why am I your hero?" And he said, "Well," and he's a shy kid. He's 10 years old. And he said, "Well, mom protects me, but you are an action person. You always take action." And I said, "Explain." He said, "You're a smart kid." And he said, "My mom protect me, and I'm so happy, she does that. But I've seen the struggles that you've been through dealing with Starfura and people people who try to get over you, and you handle it. You always, for when I hear you in the conversation, you step up and you take care of that problem." And then I said, "Oh, thank you. That's great." He said, and that's why you're my hero." And of course, I took him to school, gave him a hug, and then I got in the car, and I just tears, and I was like, because going back again to the mental health and tying it all around, no, I've never seen myself as a hero. And if you go to my Facebook, I wrote this long list of what is, my past. And if you go to my Facebook at Starfury or even LinkedIn, I posted on LinkedIn, you'll see. But I said at the very end, all of what happened in my past, it is erased by the fact that I have one person who considered me his hero. And so I said I have to walk in it and be humble. So I just want to tie that in with that story because we hear that all the time, but it's strange and awesome to hear it in real time when it's you.
So many times we should listen more to our children because they know more sometimes than we do. Their life is more simplistic because they don't have as much emotional baggage. They haven't developed that yet. And sometimes the purest, most sincere comments can come from our children.
Yeah, yeah,
Let's keep in touch. And I know that you're going to do great things. And maybe I'll see you on the moon.
yeah. Or even further, as we say in our organization, space is our universe. So thank you, David. It was a great pleasure.